No, it's, I mean, there's a difference, though, I think, between being mildly bored, but then there's another kind of boredom that I think you're talking about, which is reading requires sitting alone by yourself in a quiet room. And I have friends, intelligent friends, who don't like to read because they get, it's not just bored, there's an almost dread that comes up, I think, here about having to be alone and having to be quiet. And you see that when you walk in, when you walk into most public spaces in America, it isn't quiet anymore. They pipe music through. And the music's easy to make fun of because it's usually really horrible music, but it seems significant that we don't want things to be quiet ever anymore. And to me, I don't know that I could defend it, but that seems to me to have something to do with when you feel like the purpose of your life is to gratify yourself and get things for yourself and go all the time. There's this other part of you that's the same part that can kind of is almost hungry for silence and quiet and thinking really hard about the same thing for maybe half an hour instead of 30 seconds that doesn't get fed at all. And it makes itself felt in the body and a kind of dread in here. And I don't know whether that makes a whole lot of sense, but I think it's true that here in the US, every year the culture gets more and more hostile. I don't mean hostile like angry, just it becomes more and more difficult to ask people to read or to look at a piece of art for an hour or to listen to a piece of music that's complicated and that takes work to understand because, well, there are a lot of reasons, but particularly now in computer and internet culture, everything is so fast. And the faster things go, the more we feed that part of ourselves but don't feed the part of ourselves that likes quiet. They can live in quiet, they can live without any kind of stimulation.
Mm-hmm. Well, anarchists, first of all, the very idea of protest is a little alien to anarchist philosophy. Anarchists more believe in the idea of direct action. Protest, you're kind of appealing to the powers that be to be nicer. We don't do that. We try to directly intervene. If there's something going on that we don't like, we put our bodies in front of the road. Or, the classic definition of direct action, for example, is if there's a community that doesn't have drinking water because there's no well, normal political action, you go to the governor and you sign a petition, or you could even blockade their house, but that still isn't direct action. Direct action is you go off and dig the well yourself and dare them to stop you. So in a way, anarchism is about acting as if you are already free. And I think that's, if you want to define anarchism, well, I guess you could have a short version and a long version. The short version is simple. Anarchism is democracy without the government. Most people love democracy. Most people don't like the government very much. If you keep one and take away the other, that's anarchism. Anarchism is direct democracy, would be another way to put that. I guess the longer version would be anarchism is a commitment to the idea that it would be possible to have a society based on principles of self-organization, voluntary association, and mutual aid. It's not the belief that we're necessarily going to have it, that it's certain that we could have it. No, you can't know it's possible. But just from the same token that you can't know that it is possible, you can't know that it's not possible. So if you feel that it's better to commit yourself to the idea that it might be possible, then you're in.
Trump openly loves deregulation, so does Farage, and Marine Le Pen says that she's completely against it.
Which is fascinating because, the phrase deregulation is such a sort of ideological, it's nonsense. I looked into this and essentially it's all about getting in the first claim. They always say in law, it's like who sues who first or claims damages first is 98% of everything. It's the same thing. Who gets to claim their legislative change is a deregulation rather than a regulation, sets the entire argument. So that in America, you had the deregulation of the banks and the deregulation of the telecommunications industry. In the telecommunications case, it was getting rid of a managed competition between a few oligopolies and opening up to like a lot of mid-range firms competing with each other. In banks, it's exactly the other way around. They start with a bunch of mid-range firms competing with each other, or the airlines, I'm sorry, banks too, and they end up with a few oligopolies. So either one is called deregulation. They're exactly the opposite thing. So all that deregulation means is changing the regulatory structure in a way I like.
I think there's a change coming up, man. You can't put out trial crap 24 hours because eventually there's going to be chaos in the streets, which there already is.
Yeah.
Because people are frustrated not having their voice of reason confirmed. And everyone has that voice of reason that goes, this is bull, man. What I'm watching is bull. And yet, the media does not confirm it. So after a while, people begin to think they're insane. And that's the bummer about it, but that's why I love non-mainstream stuff, because you actually hear honest emotions. And that's what you won't hear on mainstream TV ever, is honest
Who
emotions.
killed John F. Kennedy?
The scenario points toward a coalition of anti-Castro Cuban exiles, oil-rich psychotics, according to the district attorney in Texas, retired militarists, various voices of the right, that is at an operational level of the conspiracy, and at a planning level. The Cubans were a good setup because they were disenchanted with the Kennedy administration. And also, they were lawless. You've got to remember, these informants who work for the CIA along the way, if you have government by hoodlum, what are you spawning? Every cop we know in LA has his contacts on Main Street or East 5th Street. He's got junkies and pimps and peddlers, etc. But he knows what they are, and he keeps them within perspective to work for the greater good, as they say. The CIA keeps them on staff for 20 years and gives them a watch at the end of their service, and that's the difference. This undercover thing of doing what you want to, and countermanding orders of the president, and writing blank checks, and not being checked by the Congress, spawns a government by hoodlum. That is not to say that the government subsidized the assassination. We don't know that, and Garrison denies it. But the point is, somewhere along the line, we gave up. We gave in when the government said, we know better what's good for you than you know for yourself.
The idea that America is one great big shopping mall and that all anyone wants to do is, grasp their credit card and run out and buy stuff is a stereotype, and it's a generalization. But as a way to summarize a certain kind of ethos in the U.S., it's pretty accurate, particularly after the elections we just had on Tuesday. It's the U.S. is not getting better in this area. It seems like it's getting worse.
Well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. This is not some cabal that was hatched in the dark of night. This is something that hides in plain sight. It's something we know about, but we can't connect the dots, or most people don't connect the dots. It's kind of a natural evolution when so much money and political control is at stake in the most powerful country in the world. This has evolved over time.
And you call it the real power in the country?
Correct. It is a hybrid of corporate America and the national security state. Everyone knows what the military-industrial complex is, since Eisenhower talked about it in his farewell address.
The idea of the 1%. The 1% were both that group of people who had gained basically had reaped all of the profits from economic growth. It all went to 1% of the population. But they were also the people who made all the political contributions. Something like 99% of the political contributions came from 1% of the population. Essentially, these people had bought the political system. The American political system in particular is just a system of institutionalized bribery. These people had managed to turn their wealth into power, and their power back into wealth.
Everyone knows Wall Street and its depredations. Everyone knows how corporate America acts. They're both about the same thing. They're both about money, sucking as much money out of the country as they can, and they're about control, corporate control and political control.
They were continually creating situations where they could use the government as an apparatus to extract wealth. So that capitalism itself was operating differently. The profits from the major Wall Street corporations were less and less derived from commerce, let alone production, and more simply from finance. But what finance means is other people's debts. And debts had to be created through policy, very intentional policies.
You said this, in your judgment, is the big story of our time.
It is the big story of our time. It is, I would say, the red thread that runs through the history of the last 3 decades. It's how we had deregulation, financialization of the economy, the Wall Street bust, the erosion of our civil liberties, and perpetual
Clearly,
war.
the most important thing for any social movement that believes in human freedom, or any vision of human freedom, would be create an economic system which would maximize individual initiative. The question is, can capitalism ever become that system which allows for democratic initiative for anybody with a bright idea to go ahead and pursue it? There are various structural reasons why one would believe that not to be the case. There is a certain dynamic within the system as a whole, which means that you could be the nicest person in the world, you could have the best intentions possible, you could love your workers more than yourself. It doesn't matter if you're in a competitive marketplace that's structured in a certain way. There are constraints, and there's no reason to imagine those constraints will go away if everyone means well. One of the most compelling documents I've ever seen was during the Bush administration. A group of CEOs wrote a letter to the president, actually, of the United States. They were mainly people in energy companies, essentially saying we need greater government control on energy production to contain global warming. And these are the guys who are the heads of energy companies. Basically saying, stop us before we kill again. We don't want to destroy the world, but we are compelled by the structure of our position. We're answerable only to our stockholders. We have to make the maximum amount of profit possible for them, regardless of our personal feelings. we don't like the results, create laws to stop us from doing this. And I think that brings home, very clearly what some of the structural contradictions are. But second of all, I think we have to think about labor. Is it possible to have a capitalist system which is, say, rewarding entrepreneurial risk, but anybody getting a job is taking a risk as well, and the rewards are not equally distributed to the people who are taking that risk. So the very logic of capitalism has two standards for reward of risk, one for people who are in charge of things and the other for people who are essentially at someone else's orders. Now, I think anybody who, again, believes in human freedom would not like to see a society in which most people spend most of the day being ordered around by somebody else. The question is it possible to have such a society organized on capitalist basis? Again, it strikes me that any system in which you had something like, say, workers' cooperatives, democratically organized internal organizations competing in the market, even if they were competing on a marketplace, would not be something that we would end up calling capitalism, and would not be possible under capitalism as currently conceived or taught. So it seems to me we've got at a period where capitalism has really got, it had a good historical run. But on every major measure we can find, it's running out of steam. It's no longer able to provide greater equality. It's creating greater inequality. It's no longer able to create technological innovation on anything like the scale it had before. If anything, it seems to be a break against such innovation. It no longer seems to be able to provide relative levels of peace and security for people. And at exactly the moment where it seems to be failing on all fronts, it seems surprising to me that there is this sudden movement within people who 30 years ago would have been against it to say, well, maybe we can save it from it.
But that's not true. That's what they want you to think is true. The reality is, we are the fucking government. We are the fucking people. We are the fucking government, and I think there's going to be a change. We might go through hell for a couple more years because these fundamentalist Christians are fucking doing their agenda, and they're very organized. But the reality is, the majority of people are fucking reasonable and fucking intelligent, and we don't have a fucking voice, and fuck them. I'll be the voice, at least for my little part. More that they are an alien and alienating and alienated culture.
And we
that
won't have a world until they're gone.
They no longer live in sync with the natural world. It's very interesting. It's very interesting how they have... Well, first of all, the idea of hell is a concept. It's their idea. Let them go to it. How about that be their other planet? They're the ones that believe in it.
All I want for Christmas is my tune.
Really don't like him. My little book is, in part, is an address, I hope it's got a general interest, but in part it's a reproach to the American left, to the American liberals, for falling for him and for defending him when, apart from anything else, he is an extremely, and always has been, a very extremely conservative person politically, but also because of his corrupt and selfish, and I would say mean, almost psychopathically deceitful tendencies. That have done enormous damage to politics, as any honest person could appreciate them. I think it's been a tremendous sign of the degeneration of American liberalism.
A choice to repudiate a corrupt status quo that doesn't serve their interest. People who feel they've been ripped off and lied to, they got a cause, and this cause is what we call We the People. We take no more than $100 from anybody. Why? Why? Because we think the whole system is rotten. It hasn't served the people. And the only way to break it up is to break up the money that fuels it. And
if you, after 8 years of Reagan and 4 of Bush, to conclude that the main problem in American politics was that the Democratic Party was too much to the left, seemed to me a weird conclusion. And it was all based on saying, well, what we've really got to do is address the morals of the underclass. That's the real problem with this country, is the underclass doesn't behave well. I thought that actually there were some overclass problems that needed attention.
I'm running to break up a system that isn't working, you see. And Mr. Clinton comes in, he gets all the money and makes the ads, but nothing will change because the people who've produced him have also produced the problem. And this is part of the insulation of the leadership from any real change. And this campaign is real change.
Capitalism is by definition exploitative. It's how it operates. That's fine. But then government's role should be to ease the negative effects on Americans of that exploitation, not subsidize that treachery with our money.
No one is more reliant on government handouts than corporate America. They get tax breaks, more than you and I get. They get about $100 billion a year out of every budget in direct subsidies. Everything that they produce almost everything is subsidized by the government. They get loan guarantees, they get export subsidies, they get equity grants and land giveaways. They get almost free leases on a lot of government land to do what? Harvest the timber, or mine the copper, or drill for the oil. They get oil giveaways practically, or leases. The land. It'll be estimated that there's a $15 billion worth of oil in a certain reserve on government land, and the government will lease it to them for like $500,000 or $1 million peanuts or something, so they can go ahead and take that. That's stealing from the public treasury. The airwaves, they get to lease the airwaves for a song. For a song, Fox News gets to get these airwaves. The airwaves, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the airwaves are the property of the people of the United States. You'd never know it though. They're sent out, and they're used to great profit by the media corporations and their advertisers and the like. And they get bailouts. They get billion-dollar bailouts. Mom and pop doesn't get a bailout. If things go down, you go out of business. You lose your grocery store. You lose your little cafe, whatever it is. Federal government does not give you a bailout and say, hey, you're too small to fail. Let's give you some more money to boost you up here a little bit. That doesn't happen.
We're getting at a Diddy party, and they're making us buy the baby oil.
One time my father took me aside and he said, you know, everything you see around us, this house we have, everything you see in it, I earned that with my own 2 hands, working 9 to 5 every day. You know, I would get up in the morning, I would go in, and you know, it was my labor that brought you everything you see around you. He said, David, it was horrible. Don't do that. Find some way you don't have to get a real job. You know? The thing that people in power fear the most is a population that, you know, has basic security and time. I mean, that started to happen in the late 60s. And look what happened. They freaked out. I mean, you can actually see this. There was, I've talked to people who were in different, like, sort of ruling class think tanks at the time, and they said there was a lot of discussion, like, what's going to happen when robots replace all the jobs. The problem is they also had this focus on production, that, you know, the factory labor was seen as the sort of paradigm for all labor. It was very macho, you know, males, like guys smithing things and banging things and making casting iron and so forth was a production line, perhaps, was the basic image. Whereas, of course, most labor is not actually productive if you think about it. Like, you make a glass once, right? But you wash it like 1,000 times. Most labor isn't about making things, it's about keeping things the same, maintaining things, nurturing things, giving them an environment in which they can grow, caregiving, caretaking. But then the question is, how do you validate work? Well, you just say you go back to the Puritan idea. Work is valuable in itself. If you're not like working really hard at something you don't like, well, you're not a very good person. You know, you're a parasite. So that's how you can have the situation now where people actually think their work is more valuable if they don't get anything out of it. So I think that we need to massively reevaluate this. If we're going to take off again, we need to start thinking about what makes work actually valuable, which is that it's a form of care for other people. You know, it benefits people in a concrete way, and nobody can really decide how that happens other than the people doing it. So I think if we're going to try to have that conceptual revolution, which you know, can overcome this notion of job creators, and that, you know, everybody left and right, you know, when they have they're always calling for more jobs and more work. I think, you know, because the only way they can see people as valuable is that they're like doing something they don't like very much, whether or not there's any need for it. We've caught ourselves in a conceptual trap, and I think only notions of basic income can like start us reevaluating what it is we actually value about what we do.